Death will come to all individuals, except, of course, those who are alive when Christ comes again. In 2 Samuel 14 and verse 14, it records, "For we must needs die, and are as water spilt upon the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means that his banished be not expelled from him." We must needs die. We all recognize that, even though we might not want to think about it, that death is coming. The wise man Solomon, and wiser yet because he was writing by the Spirit of God, writes, "For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 5. Death, thus. At death, realizing that man consists both of a body and spirit, it is oftentimes discussed. Some hold that man is a biune being as opposed to a triune being. Biune being just body and spirit. Triune would include body, spirit, and soul. Well, whichever one is correct, right now we're going to deal primarily with the body and the spirit. Because at death, the body is separated from the spirit. James would state that that is the situation of death in James 2 and verse 26. "For as the body without the spirit is dead," and he adds, "so faith without works is dead also, being alone." The body without the spirit, that's death. So when the spirit leaves that body, death occurs. That is the definition of death. Now then, we, with our scientific studies and all of this, still have never determined when death takes place. Well, the Bible tells us whenever the spirit departs from the body, that's death. We might not know exactly when that is, but that's when it occurs. The body goes to the grave. In Genesis 3 and verse 19, as God has come upon, He is revealing man's sin and that Adam and Eve had eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He curses Satan, he curses woman, he curses man. And in that, he says, dealing with man, that in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. For thou art till thou return unto the ground. For out of it thou wast taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. That phrase we oftentimes hear at funerals, that we are dust and we're going to return to dust. Job says much the same thing in Job 34 and verse 15, when he says, "All flesh shall perish together, and man shall be turned again unto dust." What is it? When death takes place, the body decays and returns to the dust. Solomon again writes in Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 11, or verse 20, that all go unto one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to the dust again. So he expresses that same thought that God gave to man back in Genesis 3 and verse 19. Just as an aside here for a brief minute or so, we sometimes face the question dealing with the subject of cremation. Is it wrong to cremate the body? What about all those people who died in fires, for one thing? but in reality, the body just simply returns to the dust. What happens if you burn the body? It returns to the dust, probably in a faster manner than what it would otherwise, but the same thing takes place. If someone is buried at sea, you have the same events taking place. The body is going to decay eventually if it's not eaten by the animals in the sea, and it will be finally caused to go to the dust. But what if those ashes are scattered all here and there? Well, I wonder sometimes if we limit our thinking about God far too much. If God could very simply speak into existence man and create man in such a way, do we not think that He would have all that much difficulty in recreating man and bringing all of those elements back together? There's nothing wrong from a biblical standpoint in any of those ways in which to dispose of a human body, the physical body. The body is going to return to the dust from whence it was taken. The spirit, on the other hand, Solomon tells us what happens in relationship to the spirit when he says in Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 7, "Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it." So here's the body, that physical body, it returns to the dust. The spirit, on the other hand, returns unto God who gave it. Just as another aside here, those who teach that we are totally depraved, I've never seen one deal with what is stated here. If we are totally depraved at birth, then the spirit, you're dealing with the spirit, not the physical. The spiritual would have to be depraved. And thus, God gave us a spirit that was depraved. Can anyone truly believe such? Especially in light of what James writes in James 1 and verse 17, that every good gift and every perfect gift comes from above, cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. God gives that which is good. Total depravity says God gives us a spirit that is totally depraved, that is evil and sinful and wicked. No, it's just the opposite of what we know about God. God is the one who gave us the Spirit. This is just one of a few passages that teach that same principle, that God gives the Spirit. Thus, that which God gives is good and not evil. And yet, Calvinists will come along and say, God gave us that which is evil. No. He gave us that which is good. But the Spirit returns unto God who gave it. What we find out, though, as we study the Scriptures, is that that spirit of man, while going to God, goes into that Hadean realm. The King James, and in defense of what they did in their translation, came across the Greek word Hades, from which we get Hades. And they looked at that word and they said, in reality, there's no word that in the English language that corresponds to this word Hades. Hades. And so, wrongly, they tried to translate it and they used the word hell. They should not have. Later, American Standard comes along and says, yes, that word, there's no English word that describes, that translates that Greek word. So we'll make another English word. We'll make up a word. And they did, and they thus transliterated the word to Hades. Much better, because it would avoid some misunderstandings at times. But if you think of Hades as let me just say a house for a second, and use that as a figure. Within that house, the Hadean realm, and Hades, if you were trying to define it, the word deals more with an unseen realm. So in this unseen realm where the spirit goes, there are two rooms in this house. It is a two-room house, and that's all. One is that area of paradise, and the other is, we will see in just a minute, is Tartarus. In that room of paradise, though, we see that is the case, for example, when Jesus told the thief on the cross in Luke the 23rd chapter and verse 43, upon the thief's request, remember me when thou comest in thy kingdom. And Jesus says unto him, verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. Where was Jesus going? He was going into the Hadean realm, as we'll notice in just a moment. But he says to this thief, you're going to be in that realm of Hades, because that's where all the spirits go. You're going to be within Hades, but within that Hadean realm, you're going to be within that, if I can use that term, room again, in this house of Hades. You're going to be in that realm or that room of paradise. Peter, as he's preaching that first gospel sermon in Acts the 2nd chapter, he affirms to the people that he is speaking to that Jesus was approved of God. They knew that he was approved of God by the miracles that he had performed. But then he also goes back into the Old Testament, and he says basically the Old Testament prophesied about these events. And in verse 27 he says, because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell. Again, King James uses the term hell, but literally it is the word Hades here. And that's the way in which we should understand it. It's not hell, and the job that the King James translators did in translating it hell has led to a great amount of misunderstanding. Some people, they will teach and affirm strenuously that Jesus, when he died upon the cross, went into torment. No, he didn't. He went into Hadean realm, but he said to the thief, you'll be with me in paradise. Well, now then, there's this prophecy of the Old Testament of God saying to that one who would be the son of David, because thou wilt not leave my soul in Hades, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Now then, the corruption deals with the physical body. As we've already noted, when death occurs, that body and spirit are separated. The body corrupts. It returns to the dust from whence it was. But here's a prophecy of one whose body is not going to corrupt. That is a prophecy of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And while the body, while normally it would corrupt, in this case it's not. What about the spirit of man? the spirit's not going to remain in that Hadean realm, which he called paradise, in which he was going to the thief on the cross. And so while he was going to go into that realm of Hades and that room within Hades of paradise, he wasn't going to remain in paradise. Why? Because he would be raised from the dead. And so in verse 31, Peter goes on to affirm, he, saying this before, spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in, again, King James has hell, literally it is Hades. Neither did his flesh see corruption. Why? Because of the resurrection, his body was raised from the grave, and his spirit returned to that body. It did not remain within that Hadean realm. We also learn that within that Hadean realm, those spirits in paradise, that room of Hades, are blessed. In Luke the 16th chapter, we would find in verse 26, and this is the historical account of the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man has looked up and he's seen Abraham and asked Abraham a question. And now then, Abraham is responding to that by saying, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. We'll get to the rich man later on, but now then, centering just upon Lazarus. And Abraham says he is being comforted. That while on this earth he didn't receive much comfort, he was basically, we might say, afflicted, use that term. But now then, he is receiving comfort in that realm of paradise. In 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, in verse 8, Paul says, we are confident, I say, and willing, we are confident and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. This is a situation where you're dealing with time still, because the body is corrupted and the spirit of man is not with the body. It is absent from the body. So what's the body doing? It is corrupting, or has corrupted. But Paul says that we're willing for that to take place so that we can be present with the Lord. In other words, the spirit of man that has returned unto God, we, those who are faithful Christians, are confident that we will be present with the Lord. In Philippians, the 1st chapter, in verses 20 through verse 23, Paul has been under arrest. He appealed to Caesar, and so he was sent, and we see that journey to Rome at the last couple of chapters of Acts. But now then, at Rome, he's in prison. He is under house arrest at this time, more a friend of the state. Later on, he's going to be arrested again a second time, in which he will be the enemy of the state. But at this time, he's a friend of the state. He has been affirmed, it has been affirmed by multiple people of the Roman government, He's innocent of anything. He's done nothing wrong. But he has appealed to Caesar, and so he had to go to Caesar. But now then, under house arrest, he knows that according to Caesar, and you're dealing with Caesar Nero at this time, Nero could just say, put him to death, and he would be immediately taken out and executed. He didn't expect that to happen, but he knew that it could happen. And so he writes 4 epistles while he is in Rome under arrest at this time. Philippians is one of those letters. And in the first chapter, he's dealing with that very subject. And he says, starting in verse 20, according to my earnest expectation and my hope, and let me just stop there. His earnest expectation. You know, if we, thinking from our physical aspect, we might think the expectation of Paul would be to be released from prison. That's what I'm hoping, to be released. That's not what Paul's expectation and hope is, though. If you continue on, he explains what his expectation and hope is. What? That in nothing I shall be ashamed. Well, Paul, you might be put to death. That I not be ashamed in that death. You might be released. That I not be ashamed in that death. That's my expectation and hope. Whichever takes place, I'm not going to be ashamed. And he goes on, but that with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. So it does not matter. If Nero should say, put him to death, and he's taken out and executed, his expectation and hope in that would that be that he would not be ashamed, but that Christ would be magnified through that death. If, on the other hand, Nero, as Paul expected, said to release him, then in that he would not be ashamed, but he would magnify God or Christ in his body. That's his earnest expectation and hope. Not that he would be released, but whether he's put to death or whether he's released, Christ would be magnified in his body. And that he would not be ashamed. He goes on, though, and explains, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. How can death be gain? Now remember, Paul has just stated, my earnest expectation and hope is that I not be ashamed, and that I magnify Christ in my body. Now, if he lives, we can certainly understand Christ being magnified in his body. What a wonderful thing. And yet he says death is gain. Death is better than that. Death is magnifying Christ in your body here upon this earth. Absolutely, he says. That's better. Notice he goes on, verse 22. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what I shall choose, I wot or I know not. For I am in a strait betwixt two. A strait is a difficult position. He had a position, life and death. I'm in a difficult situation between these two positions. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. He goes on to explain, to live is better for you, but for me, death is better. Because I will depart from this world. What happens to the body? It returns to the grave. What happens to my spirit? It returns unto God who gave it, and I'm going to be in paradise. But he says, to be with Christ. Now you go back to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 8. To be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. That, Paul says, is far better than being here upon this earth. That would be needful for you, brethren, and magnifying Christ in my body. The idea that came along of soul sleeping, that when the death comes, the body returns to the grave and is corrupted, but the spirit just sleeps. It goes out of existence, in effect, as far as consciousness is concerned. There is no consciousness of anything. How can death be far better than glorifying God or magnifying Christ in our body if the only thing that happens is soul sleeping? The spirit sleeps. That's not far better than glorifying or magnifying Christ in our body. And yet that's the very argument that Paul is making here. For me to live, that's going to be magnifying Christ. It's Christ living in me. But on the other hand, to depart from this world, that's even better than magnifying Christ in the body, because then my soul's sleeping? No. My soul has returned to God who gave it, and I am with Christ. I'm with the Lord. But there's another room in this house of Hades, and we call it Tartarus. We get the word from 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. When it says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment." The word translated hell here is a Greek word, tartarou. We get our word now, Tartarus, from that. Again, there's no real word that in the English that would accurately translate that word. And so the King James translators again used that word hell. It kind of became a catch-all for the eternal state of the dead, Gehenna, then Hades, and Tartarus. But in this passage, and this is, by the way, the only time in the Bible that this word is found is right here. And in this situation, he's talking about angels that sinned. They were sent to Tartarus, and they are waiting there until judgment. Thus, we know again, it is in that period we call time. Whenever it was that they sinned, we don't know. There's a lot of details God doesn't tell us. But we know that there were certain angels that did sin, and they were sent into Tartarus to wait there until judgment takes place. Now, in Tartarus, we find that there are those who are tormented. Let's return to that historical account of the rich man and Lazarus. And Luke the 16th chapter. And let's start in verse 23. It says, "And in hell." Literally, that is the word Hades again. So in Hades, he lift up his eyes. This is a rich man now, being in torments. That's the condition of this rich man at this point in time. Was his soul sleeping? No. He was being tormented. And it says that he seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame." But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. Notice the times in which this place where the rich man is in is referred to as being a place of torment. Later on, he implores Abraham to send Lazarus back to his brothers. And he says in verse 28, For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them that they also, or lest they also come to this place of torment. Lazarus was in a place of torment. It corresponds to that place where those angels are kept, and thus we refer to it as Tartarus, even though it's not specifically stated that aspect of it. In Matthew the 11th chapter, verses 21 through verse 24, Jesus is condemning certain cities of his day. Woe to thee, Chorazin! Woe to thee, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works has reference to the miracles that he has performed. For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment than for you. Then he adds, And thou, Capernaum, which are exalted into the heaven, shall be brought down to, and again, King James has hell, but it's literally Hades. For if the mighty works which had been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained unto this day. But I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. You're going to be brought down to Hades. What is it? Well, it's a place where they're going to be suffering punishment because of the rejection of Jesus Christ. And the very word that we began with in verse 21, Woe unto thee! He is placing a curse upon these cities. Why? Because they failed to repent at his preaching. And they're going to be brought down to Hades. What part of Hades? Well, it's that room of torment where they're going to be punished and persecution takes place. Now then, let's just add here that in this house that we have 2 rooms, we could say that there is a wall that separates those 2 rooms, but there's no door. There's no going from one to the other. The idea of the Roman Catholic idea of a middle place in which someone goes to be tormented for a while, and then all of a sudden they can go to heaven after you pay enough money for your loved ones to get out of that place. No, that's not the case. Jesus shows that you're either in paradise or torment, one or the other, and you cannot go from one to the other. There's that, as Abraham put it, there's a great gulf that is fixed between thee and us, so that those who would come from here to there can't, those who would go from there to here can't. There's a separation that takes place. At the resurrection then, Christ is going to come again, and we're not going to deal so much with that resurrection. But there's going to be one event that we are going to discuss, and that is that all of them will be bodily raised. In John the 5th chapter, in verses 28 and verse 29, Jesus says, "To marvel not at this, for the hour is coming in which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice, and shall come forth. They that have done good unto the resurrection of life, they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation." Premillennialists of our day say that while Jesus says, "For the hour is coming, and all that are in the grave shall hear his voice and come forth," that there's 1,000 years of difference between the one group and the other group. No. There's no way that you can fix or fit 1,000 years in this verse. That all that are in the graves shall come forth. Not just some of them. Or some would say 1,007 years. Others might give different figures. It is a one-time resurrection. All that are in the grave going to come forth. Well, what's in the grave? That's the physical body that's in the grave. Spirit has returned unto God who gave it, but the physical body, it went to the grave, to the dust of the earth. Paul, in that great chapter on the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15th chapter, deals with this situation. Starting in verse 42, it says, "So also is the resurrection of the dead." So now then we're dealing with the resurrection of those who have died. "It is sown in corruption." Well, what corrupts? It's not the spirit that corrupts, it's the body that corrupts. It goes into corruption. It returns to the dust from whence it was. So it is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. And then he uses some other figures to express the same idea. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, he says, and there is a spiritual body. So here at death, when the body returns unto the dust from whence it is, at the resurrection, that body is going to be raised from the dead. And it's going to be raised with an incorruptible body, a body that does not decay. But that's dealing with people who are dead. Those who have already faced that death in that separation of the body and the spirit. What about other individuals? What about those who are alive when Christ comes again? And let me, as an aside here, just state from the standpoint, a lot of times we hear about, oh, the world's coming to an end and all of the people are going to be killed by a great bomb and all of these type of ideas that we're going to kill ourselves off and ice caps are going to melt and all of that nonsense. I call it nonsense because I know that when Christ comes again, there will be people, souls alive here upon this earth. We're not going to exterminate ourselves. No matter how much we try, we're not going to. There will be people here alive on this earth when Christ comes again. What about those individuals? We've seen about those who have died, but what about those individuals who are alive? Well, look at verse 51 now. He then changes, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep." The word sleep is a word that is used for death within the Scriptures. In other words, we're not all going to be dead. There's going to be people who are alive. "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." Now then, he's dealing with those people who are alive. What's going to happen to them? They're going to change. And he goes on, We shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trump shall sound, and the dead, now that he returns and mentions them, they shall be raised incorruptible. And we, who's the we? Those who are alive at this point in time, we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. The mortal cannot inherit an immortal land, an immortal place. And so this physical body that we have has to be changed to an immortal, an incorruptible body. Those who are dead, they will be raised with that incorruptible body, but those who are alive when Christ comes, they will be changed and given an incorruptible body, an immortal body, one that does not die. And then judgment will take place. Paul would say, for we must all, or so then every one of us shall give account of ourselves or himself to God. Romans 14 and verse 12. He would write to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. So this great resurrection, those who are alive, changed, everyone now has an incorruptible and immortal body, and they're going to stand before Christ in judgment. And we're going to receive according to that which we've done in our body. That judgment is not, as some have tried to surmise, a rehearsing of everything that I've done within my life. No, it's not. That's not going to happen with anyone. It is simply a separation of those who are righteous and those who are wicked. The separation that is seen in this world from those who are righteous and those who are not righteous. We as Christians, as humans, oftentimes don't see it as God does, but God sees a clear distinction, that veil that separates the two. Now we can go from one to the other while we're here in this life, but we are either righteous or we're not. There's no halfway in between. That separation is seen in the Hadean realm. That great gulf that's fixed between paradise and Tartarus. And it's that separation that's going to be seen in eternity itself. So there's that separation that takes place, and then very simply, judgment is the passing of sentence. Those on the right hand, Christ will say, enter into the joys of thy Lord. Those on the left hand, depart from me, cursed into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. It is an announcing of where we will spend our eternity. Now, and the question is this morning, where will you spend that eternity? Will it be in that land of paradise and salvation, where we will be blessed and where we will be able to spend eternity with our God? Or will it be in that land of torment, where the devil is and his angels and all of the evil ones throughout this world? The choice is up to you and me. Christ is there waiting, and He has done that which is necessary for us to have that salvation. He left heaven's home. He came to this earth, gave us a sinless, perfect example, and then died upon the cross and shed His blood so that you and I might have the salvation of our souls, might have that eternity in heaven. But He says what you've got to do is you've now got to be obedient to what I've set forth. in becoming a Christian through your faith, repenting of your sins, making a confession of your faith, and then being baptized in water for the forgiveness of your sins. Having those sins washed away now to be raised out of that watery grave of baptism, to walk in that new life of obedience and the service and bringing glory and praise to our Creator. If you need to obey that gospel this morning, or if you need to come back to once again begin glorifying God in your body, why not come as we stand and sing the invitation?